Class 2 to 9, today we are going to explore more about competition in communities and how this animal in this world will survive in their ecosystem based on modes of competition.
What is community in ecology? A community is the biotic component of an ecosystem. It consists of populations of interacting species. Types of community interactions are predation, competition, and symbiosis. Single species population interact with other species and this interaction for competition. Two species use the same limited resource which is detrimental to both, which is negative. Now let's look at competition in communities. Does there have to be a winner when animals compete? Yes, animals or other organisms will compete when both want the same thing. One must lose, so the winner can have the resource, but competition does not necessarily involve physical altercations. Do you know how this competition occurs between them? Competition happens when two or more species use the same resource and live in the same places. These animals usually compete for food, habitats, and mate, while plants compete for sunlight, nutrients, water, even pollinators, and birds, rodents, and ants may compete for seeds in desert environments. Competition in communities. Competition is one of abiotic factors that produced by living organisms that affect the ability of the other living organisms to survive in an environment. It is a relationship between organisms in which one is harmed when both are trying to use the same resource related to growth, reproduction, or survivability. Competition can occur between organisms of the same species or between members of different species. Competition has basically three forms, and it can be described in three forms concerning species interaction with each other: resource competition, interference competition, and the diffuse competition. For the first one, interference competition. In interference competition, the competition between organisms is direct when individuals interfere with foraging, survival, reproduction of others, or by directly preventing their physical establishment in a portion of the habitat. Male-male competition in red deer during rut is an example of interference competition within a species. It is also aggressive interactions when this applies to both intraspecific and interspecific competition. For example, large aphids, insects, defend feeding sites on cottonwood leaves by kicking and shoving smaller aphids from better sites. Territoriality. Some of organisms defend limited resources by actively excluding others that potentially use their resources. For example, during ruts, a bald elk uses scent marking to signal his territorial claim over resources females in an attempt to deter other males. Preemption. It occurs when an individual prevents other individuals from occupying a location by occupying the space first. For example, in the ocean, when a space opens up on the rock, the first barnacles will colonize and be at a competitive advantage due to preemption. Next, we look at intraspecific competition and interspecific competition. It occurs by various mechanisms, which can generally be divided into direct and indirect. These apply equally to intraspecific and interspecific competition. In intraspecific competition, it is a density-dependent form of competition. Intra refers to within a species as opposed to inter, which means between. Intraspecific competition occurs between members of the same species. For example, two male birds of the same species might compete for mates in the same territory. Intraspecific competition is a necessary factor in natural selection, as it leads to adaptive changes in a species through time.
Oh, someone's got a leg already.
Yeah.
You'll see how quickly this will happen. What's that, deliberate?
Based on the video you watched, it shows a intraspecific competition. Does fight over a carcass. The wild dogs, known as adults, fight over a carcass. The carcass is a resource. Both organisms need to survive. The more does you have, the less food each one gets. To the individual doe, food is everything. With very few predators of their own, the most successful does. While these does may have coordinated to take down this deer, they are now competing to see which one will get to eat first. The one that eat first will get more and be more likely to survive and reproduce. Intra-specific competition. Similar regulation occurs where individuals compete over shelter for raising young. This is often occurs with young male lions. Animals that lose are driven from the group and from the area. Studies show that intra-specific competition can regulate population dynamics, changes in population size over time. This occurs because individuals become crowded as the population grows. Interspecific competition occurs between members of different species that compete for the same resource. If the resource cannot support both populations, then lowered fecundity, growth, or survival may result in at least one species. Interspecific competition has the potential to alter populations, communities, and the evolution of interacting species. Interspecific competition. Woodpeckers and squirrels often compete for nesting rights in the same holes and spaces in trees. Even though individual animals are competing for the same shelter or food, interspecific competition is usually less critical than intraspecific competition. Example of interspecific competition: coastal marine environments like the coral reef. While corals might not seem like a competitive bunch, they are actually directly competitive with other corals. When an enemy coral is encroaching on their space, they can deploy chemical warfare to counter their rival. Often, coral fights end in one of corals being killed by the other. While the corals are not predators of each other, the competition still ends in the death of the corals. The victorious coral was simply fighting for resources it needs. For the last part, a comparison between two modes of competition. Interspecific competition occurs between individuals with different adaptations, while intraspecific competition occurs between individuals with similar adaptation. Interspecific competition occurs for a specific requirement, while intraspecific competition occurs for all types of requirements of the species. As a conclusion, competition may be so obvious in some cases. It can also be defined more broadly as the direct or indirect interaction of organisms that leads to a change in fitness when the organisms share the same resource.